we're here at SFP Nostalgia Motorsports in Area 61, where we're working on the 61 Buick Skylark project. The first thing on the agenda is to determine the engine condition, and I have my trusty whiteboard here for every project. We're in phase one. We're going to determine the engine condition. First, we're going to make sure that the engine is free. Not free as in didn't cost any money, but free meaning not seized. So I'll grab the harmonic balancer with the spark plugs out of it, and I'm going to rotate or try to rotate the harmonic balancer to see, does the engine actually spin free? That'll be the first thing. The reason we're doing that is because this car has been sitting here for over 10 years, and I want to make sure everything's good. So I want to approach this like any other car that I'd go out and buy, where I absolutely know nothing about the condition of it. The next thing will be oil condition and changing the oil. So I'm going to drain the oil and see what condition it's in, because there are a few reasons why. This is an aluminum 215 Buick block, the original engine that came in the car. It has approximately 67,000 miles on it, but these engines are notorious for a cylinder sleeve slip. And if that occurs, you can get water into your oil, among other things. So that's one thing I do want to check to make sure that we're good in that area before we move on to, why did this thing quit in the first place? So we were driving this car just locally when we first bought it, just to make sure things were good, and then all of a sudden, it died. So I want to try to nail down what is the problem here. Is it a fuel issue or is it an ignition problem? The first thing I'm going to do on the fuel side of it is the carburetor was leaking pretty bad, so I'm kind of leaning towards that direction of why it quit was probably due to the carburetor. But I'm going to rebuild that first and then try to fire up the car. If it still doesn't run, then we're going to move on to the ignition. We're going to put in spark plugs. We're also going to put in points and a condenser. The cap and rotor for the distributor is also going on this car. So I have all of those components too, and we're just going to trace each thing one by one to make sure that we can get this thing running as soon as possible. So here we go. Next, we're going to determine, is the engine free, meaning not seized? Can we move it? The best way to do this, you don't want to just do it with the starter and crank this thing over. What you want to do is turn it over by hand. I am going to try this with the spark plugs installed. Right now I just don't feel like taking them out. So I'm going to just give this a whirl like this. It should be able to turn over that enough that I can just see. So we're going to come in here onto the front. I understand it's hard to see here, but the balancer bolt. So there's the bolt in here that's actually passing through the crank pulley and into the harmonic balancer, passes through that and actually threads into the crankshaft. So let's just give this really, really light. Oh yeah, look, we're turning. So that's good. The engine spins free. Want to jack it up? All right, let me look. Look how things are. All right, you can keep going. Yep, you're doing good. Doing good. All right, stop it right there. Time to drain the oil. The drain plug on this car is actually a 7/8, has a 7/8 plug. So, oh, it's so nice to work on old American cars. Now it is filthy under here. The car did have some oil leaks, so everything under here is kind of misted in oil, which helped preserve it. But not a big deal at all. because I will clean this thing up, but also what we're going to do is make sure that this does not have any oil leaks after we're on the road. A lot of these small oil leaks though, if you start using a car again, it will tend to seal itself up in some cases. So it's always nice to just start driving the car again before tearing into all of these oil leaks, and that's what I intend to do here. Let's try to do this without making a mess. Alright, now as far as the oil, the way it looks right now, it is just black, old oil. So we're going to let that puppy continue to drain. After that, we're going to move on to the filter and go from there. Alright, I'm going to drain this oil into this container here just to see if there's any residual in the bottom here that would look concerning or be concerning to me. I started talking about this before with this platform, so I'll mention it again. The Pontiac Tempest was the same platform, however, that was the transmission was in the back. It actually had a unique transaxle independent rear suspension, and really cool engine though. You could get it with the Buick 215, similar to what's in the Buick here, but most of them came with a 4-cylinder, which was actually half of a 389, which is kind of a neat concept. So they accept the performance components from the 389. The Oldsmobile was the F85, which was similar to the 215, but it actually was a different block with a different set of heads on it. It actually had additional head bolts in it as well, and that was a turbo car. So a lot of people out there that think turbos are the latest craze, they were actually trying to become the craze back in the early 60s with both the Oldsmobile as well as the Corvair. The Corvair, you could get a turbo. So looking in here, it looks good. There's no major grit, actually no grit in here at all. Alright, with the oil drained, now we will get this oil filter off. The capacity of the system on the 215, the factory 215, is 5 quarts in the, or 4 quarts in the pan, and approximately 1 quart in the filter, depending on what size oil filter you have. The ones that came from the factory were actually pretty large, so you end up with 1 quart in the filter itself. So let's just crack that thing and leave it drain a bit. Since I didn't find any junk at all in the pan, I mean it was dark oil, but which can be expected, but no deposits in there as far as foreign material, so I don't think I'll even cut the oil filter open on here. I'm just going to remove it, replace it, and fill it with fresh oil. Now it is a habit of mine, I always like to fill the oil filter with oil before installing it, especially with anywhere the filter's hanging down. I know a lot of newer cars you have the oil filter installed upright. I remember Toyota that my wife had years ago that had the filter that was in so that you threaded it from the top down, and that one you couldn't pre-fill it because it would just all run out on the floor. But I like to pre-fill them first because you're pulling from the filter first when your pump's working. All right. So now we'll crank this on. With the oil drained and the filter in place, now we're going to add the oil. Nothing exciting here. One thing I do want to point out is this car, of course it's pre-air pump, but what kind of smog equipment do you have? Really nothing. This car doesn't even have a PCV valve, positive crankcase ventilation. It does not have a PCV system. Instead you have a breather on the driver's side, and then you have something called a road draft. Now, there are a couple different types of road draft systems out there. I can explain the ones that I am aware of because of what I worked on before, but a early Chevy small block, let's say, 1955 to 265 has a road draft system that comes out the back of the block. 283s did too. This one actually has one on the passenger side cover. So you have a breather on your valve cover on the driver's side. Then the passenger side, you have your road draft tube that comes out of the passenger side valve cover and drops down underneath your oil pan, so that when you're driving down the road, that's where all of your crankcase gases are being emitted underneath the car, and it's actually drawing a vacuum as the air flows over that tube and helping to allow this engine breathe. So it's kind of a old school setup. It is an old school setup, but it seems to work, and I'm keeping it that way. This particular breather on this side is also your oil fill. The Buick 215 does not have a fill neck on the front. So a small block Chevy in this time period would have had the fill neck in the front with the breather. This, you actually just turn your breather, it pops out, and that's where you fill your oil. So I have 5 quarts here, and this entire system is a 5-quart system. What I will put in for the time being is 1040, because we're dealing with the winter months here. Since the zinc has been removed from modern oils, a lot of people are concerned with flat tappet camshafts and their ability to last with driving on the street or at the track without the zinc in the oil. Now, I'll be completely honest, the zinc was pulled out of the oil long before I ever started putting any type of an additive into my oil on the Chevelle, and I had never had a camshaft go flat. My father, with his cars, the small block Chevys, he doesn't put any additive in it, just runs regular oil. We're not running anything exotic. I never use any type of a high-end oil in the Chevelle, and I've never had an issue. Now, just within the last year, I've been adding a zinc modifier in it, and I get that from a local engine builder where he adds it to all of his for the initial start, just for some added protection with the flat tappets. I've been adding a little bit of that, just as precautionary measure. I might put a little bit of that in here too, since this thing has been sitting so long. Alright, I'll add this friction modifier that I was talking about. It's ZDDP, and I'll put in approximately a half of a quart. It's pretty disgusting looking stuff, actually. But that'll go in, and then I'll put in the rest of my oil. So what did we learn? We learned that this could possibly be the most boring video ever put out on YouTube. But then again, not every day in the garage needs to be the most exciting thing in the world, yet it can still be rewarding and fun. However, this is pretty rewarding for me because we're checking things off the list. Remember, what we wanted to determine was the engine condition, and we're at a really good starting point. We determine, is the engine free? Absolutely. Cross it off the list. The thing turns over. That is huge. The next thing is, how did the oil look? The oil looked great on this thing, so I'm really excited that the rest of this is going to go positive anyway. I don't want to jinx myself, but I think it's going to be good. So we did our oil condition check, and we changed the oil. We put fresh oil in there, and we also added some of that zinc modifier, the additive in there, the ZDDP stuff is in there just for added measure, a little safety precaution. Next, we're going to hone in on why did this thing actually quit. And where we're going to start there, like I mentioned before, we're going to start with the rebuild of the carburetor and see if this thing will actually fire up. Even if it fires up and everything's fine, we're still going to go through it, put in the points, condenser, cap and rotor, spark plug wires. But if we rebuild that carburetor and for some reason it still doesn't turn over, that's when we're going to check, does it have spark? And we're going to go through that. And I'll show you exactly how we do that as well. So sorry if this is an extremely boring video, but this is still the steps you need to take with any car that you just either drag out of a field, drag out of a barn, or like me, one that's just been sitting around on your property for the past 10 to 12 years. So we're going to move forward with this project. It is going to get more fun as we move along. And thank you everyone for watching. If you want to see more of this, hit the like and subscribe button to remind you when I upload new videos. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care.